quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the North Carolina Broadcast Legends Production Fund, including contributions from the following. For a complete list of project funders, go to unctv.org/nclegends.
Welcome to North Carolina Broadcast Legends, featuring industry leaders sharing stories from the rich and significant history of the broadcasting business here in our state. I'm your host, Mike Weeks. Our guest today is Jim Heavner. Jim began his journalism career in high school, writing for area newspapers on a typewriter in his bedroom in hometown of Kings Mountain, North Carolina. While still in high school, he was the afternoon and weekend disc jockey at hometown radio station WKMT and did play-by-play as a sports announcer of high school games. In 1957, Jim enrolled at UNC Chapel Hill, where he was the student announcer at WUNC FM and a proofreader and an envelope stuffer at the UNC News Bureau. After his freshman year, he joined Chapel Hill radio station WCHL as a part-time announcer, and he became the station's full-time program and sales manager in 1961. At age 27, he purchased 40% of WCHL and began to grow what became known as the Village Companies, acquiring full ownership of the station and many other properties, acquiring over 36 media companies over the next 25 years that included radio stations, cable television, publishing companies, and the Tar Heel Sports Network, where he became known as a highly respected analyst and producer. Jim's commitment to local news, coverage at Tar Heel sporting events, and his unrelenting work and dedication to public service are unparalleled in our state. A local and industry leader, he served national leadership roles in broadcasting, publishing, and cable TV. And within our state, Jim Heavner is past president of the North Carolina Association of Broadcasters, recipient of the association's Distinguished Service Award, and is a member of the North Carolina Broadcasting Hall of Fame and the North Carolina Journalism Hall of Fame. Jim, thank you for joining us today.
My heavens. Well, thanks. Mike, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. My kids will say, you know, this will be, the dad had always been a legend in his own mind. And now maybe, if you stay in one place for 50 years doing the same thing long enough, I told the cameraman before we came on, if you stay in one place for long enough, then you always wind up, somebody thinks you're a legend.
Well, it might be, but you are. And let's start to tell your story. You know, you grew up in Kings Mountain, North Carolina, and your daddy worked in the mill.
Well, Dad was kind of an entrepreneur. He had when he started, Dad had done everything. He had worked, everybody in Kings Mountain at one time or another had worked in the mill. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that instructed my life was the fact that I was born in 39 and World War II had broken out, and a couple of years later the word was that Dad was a handyman. He could do lots of things, that the federal government was hiring carpenters, workers to work on the Manhattan Project in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Now let's tell people what the Manhattan Project was.
Well, the Manhattan Project was the federal government project to develop the atomic bomb that we were feverishly trying to get developed because we had understood that Germany was trying to do the same thing. So we had in Oak Ridge, they were bringing in the top scientists, the physicists, chemists, the engineers who were there to try to build this weapon, and it was very secretive. It also was a place where, if you think about it for a moment, where with all those smart folks, they're going to have really smart kids, and then what kind of schools would they provide for the children of the smartest people in the world.
So the government was bringing in some of the brightest and best scientists from around the world and their families. And everyone that came to work in that facility, they had an educational facility on there because of the top secret nature.
Right.
And those kids went to school. And so they had to have a top-notch educational facility, and you had the opportunity to be part of that.
So yeah, so I am now at age, I guess, probably starting around age 3. I'm in a preschool that's maybe the coolest preschool maybe in America. If you think about it for a moment, we're all up there behind big chain link fences on the side of a mountain, and you've got to have a cultural, it was a cultural center. It was just a cool place to be. And so for about 3 years, I had the opportunity to get that educational head start. And Dad was very bright in math, and neither of my parents had a lot of formal education, but Dad was very bright in math, and Mom was very literate. She was the reader in the family. And so with that background, they brought me, we came back to Kings Mountain when the war was over in 1945. And that gave me the head start that got me surrounded by a presumption of competence that I suspect was not really matched by the facts. But because I was so far ahead of my peers, I think it was an opportunity for me to, I think that the schools, I had a creative streak, and I think the school teacher all along the way were willing to tolerate my creative streak that others might have called misbehavior more than they might have for students who had not had that kind of background. It was pretty cool.
You had some early business experience, not only because you traveled with your dad on a route when you moved back to Kings Mountain, but you also had a paper route.
That's right. Dad had a dry cleaning. Dry cleaning place, and he, and so one of the things that I learned from Dad was I would drive around in the summertime and on weekends, on Saturdays with Dad, and I would watch his customer relationships. And Dad was very much a customer guy, and he also was maybe the most successful in town at that time, and I just learned a lot from him. So then when I was 11 years old, I think that's what you're asking about, I got my first real entrepreneurial job when I got a paper route.
Who'd you carry papers for?
The Charlotte News, and it was the coolest. It was a great job, and you learn about. I heard Don Curtis talking about how much he learned as an entrepreneur when in high school when he bought radio time in blocks and then sold it out in 1 minute ads, and if you have the paper route, you buy the papers from the Charlotte News, and then we were paying 3 cents for the paper, sold it for a nickel, so you got 2 cents every time you threw it on the porch. And they had contests, and I wanted to win every contest. And I doubled the route. I would go to the supervisor who would deliver the papers, and I said, well, tell you what I will do. If each week you'll just give me an extra half dozen papers without charging me for it, I'm going to put those papers on the porches of the folks who are not taking the paper, and then a week after I've been delivering it for free, I'll go knock on their door and tell them I'm the guy that's been delivering it free, and would you now like to pay me, I think it was 30 cents a week. It was 6 days a week for a nickel of paper. And so you could make 10 cents a week on every customer, and I'm making, this is at a time when the minimum wage in the country was probably 50 cents, and I was making, $6 or $7 a week when I was 11 years old. That was a lot of money for an 11-year-old kid.
Your entrepreneurial spirit starts coming through at an early age, and so you also get a job at the hometown radio station while you're in junior high and high school, and you do some play-by-play announcing, and that's very important because that comes back later on in your career.
Yeah, that radio station opened, I think, when I was about 12. Uh-huh. And that was a time when you would still ride your bike. And I remember when it went onto the air, this thing was coming from somewhere out of town, foot of the hill, by a creek. They put AM radio stations in a lot of places by creeks because the water, because of the dampness, improved your conductivity of the signal. And so I remember getting on my bike, and somehow or another it was like a divining rod, driving out down the hill to that radio station without thinking that I was going to have to drive back, pedal back up the hill. But I remember looking in the window of that radio station and seeing all the records and seeing the announcer and seeing all that. I was about 12, and I thought, that looks like the coolest place in the world. I'd like to be in there doing that. So within another year or two, I wound up getting a job there.
At WKMT,
Yeah.
working for Jonas Bridges.
Working for Jonas Bridges. Jonas and his wife Doris Bridges, they ran the radio station, and I was I just loved it. I went there every afternoon after school, and I did a rock and roll, or actually rhythm and blues show for an hour.
Wow.
And then in the summer, when the station would sign on early, in the spring, but it was a daytime radio station, so it could sign on earlier in the summer than it could in the winter. In the summer, I'd go before school in the morning. I'd go in there, and I was your country cousin in the morning from 5:30 to 7:30 or something, and then I would go to school and come back to the radio station in the afternoon. And you might guess that schoolwork was not getting as much attention as it might have.
All this was more fun, but you
More
did.
fun, and it was a grown-up world doing a grown-up job, and the truth is I was being paid grown-up wages, and it was pretty cool. I mean, you were making money, and it was very reinforcing. Very reinforcing. It also gave me a head start. By the time I got to Chapel Hill, then I'd had that experience.
And that's where I wanted to go next.
That's right.
You enroll in UNC Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
And you meet someone very influential that pays off later on in your life.
Oh, yeah.
Who ends up being an aide to Governor Jim Hunt. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah, Joe Grimsley, Swag Grimsley, we knew him. I got to Chapel Hill, my first semester at UNC is probably better not spoken about, except for one really cool thing we did, because we're recording this on the 60th anniversary, 60 years of my arrival in Chapel Hill. And that first year I lived across the hall from Al Lowenstein, who was the resident advisor for the dorm. And Al was a kind of a firebrand. He was leading an effort to impeach the editor of the Daily Tar Heel. And I will tell you, I'm not sure I can remember why we thought that editor needed to be impeached, but if Al wanted to do it, I was for it. So that was my first political campaign, and I followed Al around passing out leaflets while he would make the speeches, and sure enough, we impeached the editor of the Daily Tar Heel. Otherwise, my first semester was almost a disaster. And in one of the, if we think about it, Mike, those of us who somehow or another are able to be successful in whatever we set out to do, we're the beneficiary of good luck along the way, just accidental good luck, how we meet our spouses, the job openings that come along. And I was not doing well in school. I had a roommate who was abusive, and it was a challenging situation. After that first semester, one of his roommates flunked out of school. He went down there, we grabbed my stuff out of the other room, and I moved in with Swag Grimsley, who was there 4 years older than me, but he was also a freshman because he was there on the GI Bill. And so I had the benefit of a classmate who had 4 years of wisdom. He had been to Europe, and he took a liking to me, and he thought that I had an opportunity to do better than I was doing. And suddenly I went from darn near flunking out after the first semester to Dean's List the second semester. And that was all because of Joe Grimsley, who it turns out who had grown up with Jim Hunt. And he after school became Jim Hunt's right-hand man. It was secretary for the Department of Administration, ran his political campaigns, and ultimately wound up being the secretary, wound up being the director of Rockingham Community College after Governor Hunt was defeated by Jesse Helms in the senatorial campaign.
Now, let's, after you've been at UNC Chapel Hill a year, you get a job as a part-time announcer at Chapel Hill radio station WCHL. Tell us about that job.
Well, this was after my freshman year, and I'd heard the radio station had an opening, and I wandered down the hill to the radio station. Again, all the radio stations, you go downhill to get to the AM stations. Same situation. And thereupon I came upon Ty Boyd and Sandy McClamrock, two very different personalities, but the two men who became the dominant influence on my life very, very rapidly. And if there is a common thread to whatever good things that started happening to me at that time, it was that I came upon the good luck of having marvelous mentors. Ty Boyd sort of took me again under his wing and just began to teach me about life. I think my life skills were not very great. I was growing up in Kings Mountain. Should say a word about that. It was a wonderful place to grow up. It was sort of a Tom Sawyer kind of existence. Everybody kind of lived. We had what we thought was a really cool house. We had a house on the corner with the biggest lot where all the kids played ball together, and it was and everything about it was just a wonderful place to grow up, and then a good place to grow up and leave to go find opportunity somewhere else. But it had not. What had come out of that was anything but polish, anything but a worldview that would sustain itself in a larger stage. And this is what Ty brought to my tutelage. And then he was just a big magnetic personality. And then Sandy McClamrock, who owned the radio station, was on the town council and on his way to becoming mayor.
Mayor of Chapel Hill.
And very much involved in the community. And his view was that if you're going to work here at the radio station, a part of your job is community service.
Yes.
You are expected to play some role. We're expecting this radio station, because of who we are and the responsibility we have, to play a role in community leadership in whatever way we might define it.
So let's move forward. You have a part-time job as an announcer. You're a great announcer. You've done play-by-play at WKMT, at your hometown radio station during high school. You're above averages, putting it mildly, and you get a lot of opportunities, but you graduate and you get a job in television. Let's talk about it. You worked at WTVD. What did you do there?
Well, I was still in school. I was the staff announcer on WTVD from 4 till 11, and so about everything on the TV station I did. Did I hear Don or someone, I'm not sure, talking about a time when they had played Don Curtis, when they were talking about some silly role they had played on the TV somewhere, and I did everything on the air. I did. We had the Fun House, which was the cartoon show.
Kid show.
Live
audience.
And the big set had 3 big circles, like you've got 3 big circles with Bugs Bunny in his head in one of the circles, the Three Stooges head in one of the other circles, and my head with a bowler cap in the middle of the circle. And I would, hi kids, I would do the moderation of the cartoons and talk between the cartoons. Then at 6 o'clock, I was the SO reporter. I would go back in, I'd put on my jacket, and then you would do the news. And so you would speak to one camera to do the news, and then to do sports, you would turn and look at the sports camera, and then they would have you seated in a stadium setting, and then you would turn to this camera, and it would be the weather. So you were doing all of that, and all the commercials were live.
And I want you to tell us about one particular commercial,
live.
Because one of the big advertisers then was Sears.
Oh, yeah.
And tell us about the lawnmower commercials that you did.
People ask you about the pressure of being on stage. Let me tell you, on the Tar Heel Sports Network, where we were live and everything could possibly go wrong because you were in distant situations, there's no pressure like having to do 16 Sears lawnmower commercials on TV live.
With a lawnmower.
And with the lawnmower.
Yes.
And start the lawnmower every time they started. It was a new product. It was instead of having to take the cord and pull it this way, it had the little spring-mounted crank. So you would wind the thing up and you would pull it over and you would go like this and make the thing and make the lawnmower start.
Yeah.
And it started every time. But I
time.
always thought, what am I going to do if it doesn't start? But if we think about that for a minute, having whatever we want to call it, the pressure of doing live commercials, the studio would be ringed with little 5-foot sets, and so you would do the Belk's commercial on this set, and you would hold it up. We had no teleprompters. The only teleprompter they had was that we would write out the copy on long sheets of AP wire copy paper, and so the studio, the cameraman would be holding up the copy as you would do the commercial. So that was our teleprompter in those days.
We need to segue
about
forward.
1958 or 59.
All right, so let's go forward.
Yep.
In 1961, Ty Boyd leaves and goes to Charlotte, and you get his job.
Yes, he replaced Grady Cole, who was a legend on WBT.
Okay.
And so and Ty was the legend in Chapel Hill, and he
So
went off to
your
Charlotte.
title is station manager?
Yeah. It was really Ty's job. And the truth is, Sandy was off being mayor, and Ty really ran the radio station. He was program director, sales manager. Sandy kept the books and made sure we all got paid. And I later came to have a much higher respect for that. I'll remember one day Sandy came in and he said, here's a list of half a dozen people. Go get some money from them. And I said, really? And he would show me, and it would be this store would owe us $80, this store would owe us $120, this store would owe us $120, and they would be behind. And he would say, you need to go see them. We've got a payroll Friday.
That's the reality of business.
So that brings it home. You're saying this is what entrepreneurship is all about, and the responsibility of all of that. And so Sandy went off to be mayor, and Sandy was as taciturn. He was as introverted as I was extroverted. He was as quiet as I was voluble, and so he would leave me alone. And we were in the middle of the 60s, where we had all the civil unrest that went with the civil rights revolution, and Sandy was fully engaged in having to deal with those issues, and really had very little understanding of how little I knew. All I knew was that somehow or another, sales got a little better each year than they did before, and then they would get better and better. And I think that Sandy would look at the fact that he had somebody there who was making the business get better, and it was all right. The boy's doing okay.
Okay, well, let's talk for a minute about someone else you met very interestingly. About the time you became the station manager there, Dean Smith became the beginning of his career as a legendary basketball coach at UNC Chapel Hill. How did you meet Dean, and what was your association with him?
Well, Dean and I were neighbors in what was called Old Ridgefield in Chapel Hill, where everybody lived in a house pretty much about the same thing. I was looking the other day, I think we all paid about $12,000 for those nice little 3-bedroom homes, and we were looking the other day, they're about 20 times that today with inflation, but that neighborhood is still there, and it was a wonderful starter neighborhood. Dean had kids, and I had kids, and so I got my job replacing Ty about 30 days before Dean got his job replacing Frank McGuire. He was replacing a legend. I was replacing a legend. It's interesting, we were both making about the same amount of money. And the difference was that Dean was 9 years older than I was. And the difference in 30 and 21 is a lot. And he had spent his lifetime, his dad was both a teacher and a coach. And so he had spent a lot of his life thinking about leadership, thinking about organizational development, thinking about team building. And so I went to see Dean after he had been there for a couple of months, and I said, you know, we always interviewed Coach McGuire, and he liked being on the radio, but we never paid him anything to do it, and I'm trying to think of ways to make money. And Dean, you're trying to figure out, because he was concerned about whether basketball was going to fall off because we were losing this icon, and whether the program would have the support that he wanted. So he was happy to be on the radio. And I said, Coach, why don't we do a radio show every day during the season? Because if we do a live radio show, I think people will like that. We'll do a little 5-minute show, and we'll pay you for it. And we'll sell the advertising, and we'll give you something, and the radio station will get a little something. But the implication of this was that Dean had to drive by the radio station to get to his office every morning, so he would come by the radio station. And we did a live radio program throughout this season, every day for 7 years, until WCHL became a nighttime station in 1968. What this did, and then I began to travel with the team doing sports programming for CHL, and it really gave us a lot of time together to talk about team development and leadership, and it was really, really helpful to me at that time.
We're running out of time, Jim, but I want to briefly just kind of summarize, because we also have a long-form interview, and there's so much about your story that we aren't going to be able to tell today. But if people are interested to learn more about the Village Companies, your association with Dean Smith, helping Woody Durham to get his start in the business.
Yeah.
You were involved in all of that with the Tar Heel Sports Network. You can watch our long-form interview by going to ncbroadcastlegends.com. Again, that's ncbroadcastlegends.com. And Jim, I regret that we're running out of time. It's hard to compress a career as stellar as what you've done in such a short period of time. But the Village Companies was over 25 different properties and acquisitions, and we hope that people will watch the long-form interview to find out more about your wonderful history and all the things that you've done. And you continue today to be one of the biggest advocates I've ever met for the local community, and particularly for Chapel Hill.
Well, thank you, Mike. And I would just say, of all the things that we've done, the great thing about our business is that what we do gets noticed by an awful lot of people. But the folks that you've chosen to be in this group are all blessed with great families. And the thing in my life that I'm most proud of is the achievement of my 3 daughters and my wonderful sister and my spouse. Those at the end of the day, that trumps everything, every other good thing that's ever happened.
Well, you're very kind to make those remarks, and it's very nice for you to be here with us today. And thank you, Jim, for sharing part of your story. And again, to see the long-form interview, you can go to ncbroadcastlegends.com to find out more about the contributions to the great state of North Carolina by Jim Heavner. Please join us again for another edition of North Carolina Broadcast Legends. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the North Carolina Broadcast Legends Production Fund, including contributions from the following: For a complete list of project funders, go to unctv.org/nclegends.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.